in mercy, he laid down his life for us, taking care of the penalty of sin. That was Psalm 22. In Psalm 23, we're being saved from the presence or the power of sin. And that aspect is beautifully seen in the 23rd Psalm, as Jesus is shown to be the good shepherd. David understood the role of a shepherd, as we said. He made a bold statement when he said, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." That encompasses a lot. I don't have any need. I don't have anything that I need. He provides for my needs. Now, there's a difference in our needs and wants. Our list might go quite long, but David said he's taking care of me. Like the sheep were truly at the mercy of the shepherd. Take them where they needed to eat, where they needed to graze, to provide for them in every way. So David said, "The Lord is my shepherd." And Jesus himself stated the fact that he also is the good shepherd. And that good shepherd is one who cares for his sheep, who lays down his life for his sheep. You see, back in the Old Testament days, David understood that when you have sheep in a corral or an area, many times in that part of the world, sheep are put into a cave or a corral type area for the night, and the shepherds would take turns watching after the sheep while others would sleep. And then in the morning, and I've been told it's quite a sight to see even today, the shepherds, one at a time, will go to a certain area and call out to their sheep. And their sheep hear their voice, and they come out from the other sheep and start following that shepherd. And then the next shepherd will call his, and they will come out from the rest of the sheep and follow that shepherd. The sheep know the voice of the shepherd and follow the shepherd wherever he goes. Jesus said, "I am the good shepherd. My sheep hear my voice, and they follow me." You see, if you belong to the Lord, if you've been saved, you're going to want to follow the shepherd because you know he cares for you. Now, sheep are too dumb to understand it all. They don't realize their danger. Of course, maybe we need to be applying that to ourselves even more. Maybe we're pretty dumb too at times. We need to just dumbly follow him. Don't abandon the thought of what you want to do and just in a total abandonment follow the Lord. He has a plan and a purpose for us. It's when we start trying to run things and we get it all messed up. It's when we allow him to lead that everything goes better for us in our lives. It says in verses 3 and 4 of John 10, he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought all his own outside, he goes ahead of them. The sheep follow him because they know his voice. The hired hand, since he is not the shepherd and doesn't own the sheep, leaves them and runs away when he sees a wolf coming. "I lay down my life for my sheep," he said. "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I've come so that they might have life and have it in abundance." Of course, the thief in the illustration that Jesus is giving in John 10 is the devil, who wants to lead us astray and cause danger and harm to our life. But God cares for us. "My sheep hear my voice. I know them. They follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand." Jesus is saying that he's the fulfillment of that which was spoken of in the 23rd Psalm. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." And even in the darkest valleys of life, as the 23rd Psalm said in verses 4 through 6, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." You've heard me share it before. The valley is created by mountains on either side. There's no way out. It's like death is hovering over him. We use that passage a lot of times at funerals because it is a passage that we've come to lean on and depend on the mercy and the kindness and the caring of God to take care of us. But David is really talking about life experiences, not death. When he says that, the valley of the shadow of death, he's in the shadows of death. He's not necessarily experiencing death, but death is hovering over him. It's a dark moment in his life. And he says, but I'll fear no evil because you're with me. And your rod and your staff. Now, rod would take care of predators that would come after the sheep, like a club. The staff was that which had the crook that would keep the sheep herded up, especially if they're going in mountainous areas so they wouldn't fall off the cliff. And the crook also would pull sheep back from the areas that they've gotten into, down in a ravine or something. It would help pull them back to safety. The staff took care of the sheep from endangering himself, whereas the rod would take care of predators that would be endangering from the outside. So both from the inside as well as the outside, he's saying, you're taking care of me. From outward danger as well as danger from myself. And the benefits and provisions that we can enjoy because Jesus is our good shepherd are seen as we come to that passage in John chapter 10. And the qualities, the characters of a shepherd are mentioned there. But how are we to live in response to God's revelation of his character through his Son as our shepherd? Well, we're not to live on our own. We're to live out our salvation on a day-to-day basis. Our life is not our own. We belong to Christ. And our good shepherd cares for us. We know of his provisions and his caring. Why wouldn't we want to follow him and be obedient to him? That's what Jesus was trying to say to us. As a shepherd cares for the sheep, I care for you. I've brought salvation to you. And like David would say in the 23rd Psalm, you have no wants when you're following me. I'll take care of you. I'll provide for you. And you just be obedient to me. Don't try to live outside my will or you get yourself in trouble. Live in the center of my will. He'll guide, he'll empower, he'll nurture, he simply takes care of us if we will but let him. Now 22 again revealed God's character through Jesus' death that saved us from the penalty of sin. Psalm 23 revealed God's character as Jesus is our shepherd and he's saving us from the power of sin. Now we come to the 24th Psalm, or Psalm 24, which reveals God's character in the eternal reign of his Son, where we will be saved from the very presence of sin. And you have that on the back side. No, excuse me. No, on the second page, it'll be the front and the back. No, that's Psalms. Excuse me. All right, go back to page 1. Go back to the front of page 1. I'm getting ahead of myself. Go back to the Psalm 24. We will be saved from the presence of sins. And what are the qualities of God that are revealed in the eternal reign of his Son? So look with me as we look to the 24th Psalm. The earth is the Lord's and all its fullness, the world and those who dwell therein. For he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the waters. Now here's the question. Who may ascend into the hill of the Lord, or who may stand in his holy place? In other words, what question is the psalmist really asking in verse 3 of 24? When he's saying, who can ascend into the hill of the Lord, or who can stand in his holy place? He's asking who can go to heaven. His holy place is in the presence of God. Who can ascend the hill of the Lord? That means who can get to where God is? That's the question that the psalmist is asking. And what he's really asking, who can be saved? That's what he wants to know. Who can be in God's presence for all eternity? And then he answers that in verse 4. He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted up his soul to an idol, nor sworn deceitfully, he shall receive blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. Now, is this good or bad news for us in verse 4? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted up his soul to an idol, nor sworn deceitfully. Is that good or bad news? Can be good news. But what happens if you're not doing those things? Then it's bad news, isn't it? In other words, it's up to us. What are we doing with our life? In other words, that's climbing the mountain of the sovereign Lord and standing in the holy place was an act of privilege and a blessing that only those who qualified are going to be allowed to do. Now, what do you think people mistakenly think qualifies them to go to heaven and be in God's presence? What do people generally think it takes to go to heaven, in other words? Be good. If I live a good life, I'm good to my neighbors, if I pay all my bills, okay, if I go to church, you know, if I do this, I'm going to get to heaven. Is that what the Bible says? What was the only way that you can have clean hands and a pure heart? Look back at verse 4 there. What's the only way we can have clean hands and a pure heart?
Ask for forgiveness for the dirty ones.
Sir?
Ask for forgiveness for the dirty ones.
All right. Ask forgiveness for the sins that you have committed. And see, we're not worthy in ourselves, are we? We can't have clean hands and a pure heart. As much as we try, we can't do it on our own. All of our righteousness means our goodness. All of our righteousness is as filthy rags. And when I studied the language of the word filthy rags there, it means not the kind of rags that I sometimes use and wash out and use again and wash out and use again. This meant to the point that it's not even usable. It can't even be washed out and cleaned. It's all of our righteousness is as filthy rags, meaning it's the kind that is ready to be thrown away, done away with. No good even to be used as a rag anymore. That's our goodness just doesn't measure up. It can't put us at a plane that we can go to heaven. It can't qualify. So it is that truth that enables us to eagerly and confidently look forward to what Christ has done for us. And look at verses 7 through 10, where he says, "Lift up your heads, O you gates, and be lifted up, you everlasting doors. And the King of glory shall come in." Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O you gates, and lift up, you everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. Selah. Selah occurs in, I'll have to look it back up. I've counted the number of times. It's in many of the Psalms. Some of them it's in the middle of the Psalm, and in this case it's at the end of the Psalm. It's a musical terminology that was, in many cases it meant the beginning of another verse. It was a separation of verses, like we have verses 1, 2, 3, and 4. And somebody said, I would never want to be verse 3 in a hymn. You know, you'd be forgotten. In many cases you were. When Charles Weedman was here as our music director for the first 17 years of my ministry here, Charles Weedman, it was Charles every verse Weedman. Everybody used to tease because he didn't leave out a verse. If it had 5 verses, you were going to sing all 5. He believed whoever wrote the song meant for all the verses to be sung so that you'd know the full story. And we sang every verse. But, you know, when you're thinking about Selah as separating verses, it also means pause and think on these things. It was a pause in the middle of a psalm. It was another verse. And it's always amazed me, not in your newer praise songs, saw some notes I wrote in the back, some new songs I switched. But all of your hymns, the fourth verse is always about death, dying, or heaven. You've never paid attention to that. I can sit up here on the platform on Sunday mornings, and when we're singing, I can tell you when the last verse is coming along because of what the words are. If it's death, dying, or heaven, it's going to be the last verse. It's just the way they wrote.
Well, that's reality.
It's the reality of it all. You had all of these other verses, and then what is amazing grace? When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun. What is that? It's about heaven. And all the other was amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. But all of a sudden you get to that last verse and it's about heaven. So just watch these verses, songs sometimes, and you'll see the interesting points of that. But Selah meant pause and think on these things. And when you're reading the Psalms and you come to one of those words, Selah, think about what he has just said. And as we look at this particular phrase in the 24th Psalm, here the words of praise to God and this return of Christ, the verses in their historical context are interesting. Let me get to some notes that I had on that. Well, I'll get there in just a second. This is the final section, and the demand is given to the singers at this point. To lift up your heads, you gates, rise up, ancient doors, and then the King of Glory will come in. And this description of the King of Glory is the description of a king coming back in from battle who has been the victor in the battle. They would open up the gates, they would welcome in the king as he's riding in, and the armies are following him, and there would be praise and gratitude and the applause for the returning army that had been victorious. Many times those that they had brought back as evidence of their victory, they would be chained together. They would either serve as slaves to them, or there was this, and they would also bring back a lot of the, we call it the booty, the items that they had conquered, the things that the people had that they would be bringing back to their own people. And this was part of the victory of announcing the King of Glory. The King is coming back. And in reference to God as the King returning, you have this voice asking, who is this King of Glory? And then the answer to that, the Lord strong, mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. And again, is recognizing the strength of God, the fact that it doesn't matter what has happened in our world, God is the ultimate victor who will be announced to the world as he is the King of Glory. He's worth serving because in the end, the final word to be said is God comes out on top. He's the victor in the battle of life. And all of those who have followed him are on his side. But those who have rejected him will be defeated. When his kingship is properly recognized, the next move is for us to worship him. That's why throughout eternity, we're going to be worshiping God and praising him and thanking him for making possible our getting to heaven. We didn't get there on any merit of our own. It's only because of what he's done for us. And we're going to be praising him and thanking him that we're not spending an eternity separated from him, but we're with him. And so that's what it's helping us to understand. When you get through the difficulties of life and you realize that God is the victor of it all, he's the one who has won, then you want to worship him, and submitting to him in this life should be the desire in order to be a part of that victory celebration. In other words, why would we want to live aside from him, apart from him, and think that we're going to be on the victor side in the end? You see, when you realize that in the end he wins, why not get on the bandwagon now and serve him faithfully now so that you can be a part of it all? Because you're not going to be on his team if you've rejected him throughout this life. And the God whom Israel worships in Psalm 24 is the Lord of creation, to whom belongs everything. He created it all, as he begins in verses 1 and 2 of that psalm to say, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. He owns it all. He's the one who started it all. This same Lord also delivered his people out of bondage in Egypt. He set them free. That's in those next verses. So it's also fitting that those who worship the Lord should also recognize his kingship. And in the greater scheme of things, the picture of God further expands with the coming King of glory, Jesus Christ. This new King of glory has all the power and the authority given to him by the Father. That's what Jesus said. I and the Father are one. And it's all been given to him. But rather than claiming and using that power to defeat his enemies, he humbled himself. Philippians chapter 2, you have that parabola. He humbled himself, became a man, and then submitted to death, even the death of a cross. That's at the bottom of the parabola. As you understand that he who's the King of glory became a man and then submitted to death. Not just any death, but the death of the cross. Therefore God also hath highly exalted him. And exalting is meaning being brought up. You come from the lowest to the low, the very bottom. You come to the point of God exalting him and giving him a name which is above every name. Name means something. And God gave him a name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus, every knee would bow and every tongue confess that he's Lord. You see, this one who gave up his all didn't come to earth as a king. He came as an humble servant, didn't he? But he had all the qualities of kingship. He was the king. He's the creator of heaven and earth, the Bible says. As even the psalm here was declaring to us, and we see the fulfillment of it in Jesus. The character of God is that he owns it all. But he doesn't push it on us. He'll tell us who he is and what he's done for us, but it's up to us whether we want to follow him or not. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. And for this reason, God has highly exalted him. He gave him a name that's above every name. That's Philippians 2, 8 through 11, where you find these verses about the exalting of God. This hymn to the King of glory reminds us of the character of God, that he will save us from the very presence of sin when we come into his kingdom in heaven. There temptation cannot be. Satan will not have an opportunity to tempt us, to get us to do that which is wrong. The very presence of sin is no longer going to be around where we're in his presence as we're ushered into heaven by him. I many times think that which he did for Stephen, he does for each of us. The Bible says that he's seated at the right hand of the Father. It's a place of honor. But when Stephen was stoned to death, the Bible says that he reached out to draw him into heaven. You see, he doesn't just sit there waiting. I think when it's our time to go, he reaches out for us to bring us into his presence. A loving, caring Father that we've seen in the character of God even in these Psalms. A God who cares enough that he saves us from the penalty of sin as we are made aware of our sins and the forgiveness he offers. Who saves us from the power of sin is as he's revealed as the shepherd who truly cares and provides for all of our needs. And as we're saved from the very presence of sin, as he ushers us into his presence in heaven as the King of glory. The one who was rejected as the cornerstone has now become the chief cornerstone. God himself, who will one day bring us into his presence in heaven. Psalms, the character of God as seen in these particular passages. Let's move to the next, and I know we won't finish it, but let's get started with it. But we don't always do what we're supposed to. The character of God is seen as he's willing to forgive. He's a God who saves us from our sins, knowing that we're going to sin, but he makes possible our forgiveness, even once we have trusted him. And David is the prime example of that. And in Psalm, that says 31. But it's supposed to be Psalm 32. How joyful is the one? I believe I forgot to double check that. That's the one whose transgression is forgiven. Yeah, 32. That's supposed to be Psalm 32 and Psalm 51. Not Psalm 31 and Psalm 51. These two Psalms, 32 and 51, are both Psalms of David. And this is interesting too. Most of the Psalms were written by David, though there were some others who wrote some of the Psalms. And there were always, some headings on them. Like Psalm 32 says, it's a Psalm of David. But you come to Psalm 34, look there, a Psalm of David when he pretended madness before Abimelech, who drove him away and he departed. You see headings at the beginning of all but 34 of the Psalms. Only 34 of them will not have a heading. But most of them will have a heading telling you something about that psalm. And it wasn't just the writers, the translators of our Bible who did that. Those were a part of the Psalms as well. So you see that 32 is a Psalm of David, a contemplation. It is his contemplating his situation. When you look over at Psalm 51, get over to that point right quick. Psalm 51, it says, to the chief musician, a psalm of David, when Nathan the prophet went to him after he had gone into Bathsheba. And it is a prayer of repentance. But it was written to the chief musician. They put that psalm, to music for everybody to know, look, what God did for David, he can do for any and all of us who will repent. But Psalm 32 and Psalm 51 are the repentance, the Psalms of restoration and repentance. And just like in the first group of Psalms, we saw that it's difficult sometimes to translate into our own language, what was being said in that day. We're looking today at something that's difficult to explain. How do you explain God's willingness to forgive? If you've ever had to forgive somebody who's done you a terrible wrong, you know that that's not easy. It's not easy to forgive. But God gives us the example of forgiveness, and if he's willing to forgive, he's helping us to see that we too should be willing to forgive. And we have even examples out of the New Testament that tell us that if we don't forgive, we're in jeopardy of violating what God has told us we should do. Model prayer, and forgive us our trespasses, that means our sins, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And Lord, in other words, Lord, I want you to forgive me to the extent that I'm willing to forgive others. Now wait a minute, Lord, I want to be forgiven, but I'm not so sure about those others. That's more of how we feel sometimes. We're actually praying in the model prayer, Lord, forgive me to the same extent that I'm willing to forgive somebody else. David was a king. Kings could do anything they wanted. So what David did, in actuality, he could have said to Nathan the prophet when he came to him, look, it doesn't matter. I'm the king. I have the right to do anything. But David was a follower of God. He was a child of God. And as a child of God, he understood he didn't have the right to do anything he wanted. And you remember the story that Nathan came and told him about this man who had many sheep in his flock. And this other man just had one sheep. His family loved that sheep. And the man with many sheep in his flock had a visitor going to come see him. Rather than kill one of his own sheep to prepare as a meal for the visitor, he sent somebody over to get that one sheep from that family and have it killed to provide the meal for his family. David got angry. That should never happen. Whoever did that deserves to die. And Nathan said, "You're the man. Exactly what you've done." And he was telling about the fact that David had committed adultery with Bathsheba. It produced a pregnancy that they weren't expecting. So David came up with an alternate plan to get the monkey off his back. He brought her husband Uriah in from the battlefield. Certainly being gone from home so long, he'll come tell me about the battle. That's what he pretended he was calling him in for, to give him a report of the battlefront and how things were going. And then he'd go home and spend the night and then be on his way back to the battlefront the next day. But certainly by spending the night, he's going to probably have sexual relations with his wife, and that baby coming along, it'll be thought to be his. The word came to David that Uriah's asleep at your doorstep. He didn't go home. So the next day, David had him called back in and said, "Man, what in the world is wrong with you? You've been away from home. You need to go home, see your wife. And then you can go back to the battlefield." And Uriah said, "I can't do that when these other men can't come in to see their families either." What about the character of Uriah? That says a lot for him, doesn't it? When you stop and think, here's a man who's called home that could have gone to see his family and then gone back to the battlefield, and even David encouraged him to do so, and he still wouldn't do it. He said, "They can't be home. I can't either." David wished for that night to be different, but it was still the same. He slept at his doorstep, would not go home. So David wrote a message, a death message really, gave it, sealed it, gave it to Uriah, and he carried his own death message back to his commanding officer. The message said, "Put Uriah in the thick of the battle." He wasn't saying, "Have him killed," but he knew that was exactly what would happen, didn't he? Put him in the thick of the battle. In the worst part of it, you put him at the front line, in the front of the line. He'll get killed, and then we'll work this other out somehow. And that did work out. Uriah, faithful to his king, took the message back to his commanding officer. The commanding officer saw it and he wondered, is this for real? You read all about that too. But he obeyed what David had said and put him on the front line, and Uriah did get killed. And the commanding officer sent the word back to David, "It has been done as you asked." So David then took in a grieving widow to his household. And when the baby was born, he got sick. And he mourned for that. He prayed that that baby would live, you'll remember. He wouldn't eat anything, wouldn't bathe or anything else as he prayed and cried out to God to spare the life of that child. But the baby died. One of the penalties that he paid. That child was taken care of. He was gone on to be with the Lord. But David had all of this guilt. David knew what was going on. Bathsheba was in his household now. He's taking care of her. And now Naaman comes along. He thinks it's all, covered over. She doesn't have a husband now to come back home. I'm taking care of her. And, the baby's no longer around either. We can move on with life. But God knew, didn't he? You see, there's nothing that's hidden from God. No matter how well we try to plan things, God's aware of it all. He knows what takes place. And so David is under conviction. David knows that what he's done is wrong. He knows that God is aware of all of this. But he's going on in his kingship. He's doing things as he thinks he's supposed to be doing. But how do we explain outright, purposeful, obvious sin? Especially in the lives of those that we know, say they know God, and that they're children of God. We have all probably experienced the disappointment of someone that we had a lot of faith and trust in, who messed up in life in one way or another. I'll never forget that happening in my life. We'd had a man, some of you may remember, I was just a kid, but this guy worked with the Louisiana Marlin Civic Foundation, went around to all schools giving talks and everything, and he would preach revivals, and my dad had him for a revival at Crowell, and he was an outstanding person. People just loved him, thought highly of him. I did too. He stayed in our home while he was doing the revival there, and I got to know him even better. And then later, I heard about his fall. Committed adultery and got out of the ministry, and it devastated me. As a kid, I had put him up on a pedestal. He was right up there next to God, you know. I thought so much of him. I'll mention it. Charles Fleury. Any of y'all ever hear that name? Remember him? Again, I know that's been a few years ago, but he went all over the state of Louisiana. There were a group of young people that they sang at the schools and gave talks to kids about doing what was right and all this kind of thing. And it's happened since that time. That was the first that I remember. But you've had that happen. How do you explain that? How do you explain that somebody that knows the Lord, who knows what's right, who knows what they should be doing, doesn't do it? I remember my dad sharing with me back in those days and at that time, and it's been true in the other times too. If you put your faith and confidence in man, you'll be disappointed. But if you put your faith and confidence in God, you'll never be disappointed. And that's something we always need to remember, because in people, we'll get disappointed at times. And it hurts, because you hate that. Can you imagine? People looked up to David. David, Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. You remember how the people acclaimed David. In fact, he's still known as the greatest king Israel ever had. He's still known as a man after God's own heart. How could a man like David be known as a man after God's own heart?
Because he's human.
The reason is, when his sin was pointed out to him, rather than explain it away, rather than saying, I'm the king and I have the right, and he legally had the right to do anything he wanted, he humbled himself and confessed his sins before God. Even as a king, he humbled himself before God and confessed and asked God's forgiveness of his sin. Now, for a king to go over the entire body of people, to humble yourself like that was a big move. And yet that's what made him a man that the Bible says was a man after God's own heart. It wasn't because of his previous life. It was because of the fact that he was willing to seek the forgiveness of God for the sins and to do whatever he could to rectify it, even though he had to pay the price for what he had done. You remember the rest of the price he paid? First, the baby died. Then one of his sons committed adultery. In fact, raped his daughter, David's son raped David's daughter. And then the brother got upset with the son and wanted to kill him. And then Absalom wanted to overthrow his dad. And the family got in turmoil, even to the point of wanting to overthrow the dad's kingdom. And David was ready to hand it over to him. Remember, he left out of the city and was convinced that he needed to fight for the cause of his people. And they came back as an army to defeat Absalom and the armies that Absalom had put together. And the one request David had, I know we need to fight to win this thing, but don't kill my son Absalom. He still loved him and didn't, even though he was in rebellion against him, he didn't want it to happen to him. But it had to happen. And it did. And he died. What I'm saying is, David's sins were forgiven, but there was a price to pay for the sin that he had committed. That's something we all need to keep in mind. God will forgive, and we're going to get on into that. I'll finish this part next week. I'm going to let you go in just a second. But never forget that there's always the consequence. You see, we can choose what we do, but we can't choose the end result of it. The penalty for what we do has been determined. And if we commit the sin, the penalty is going to be there. Even though you're forgiven, there's still a price to pay. And God will walk with you through it, even in the doing of that. But He'll forgive. And I'm thankful for His forgiveness. And we're going to get into that as we see the compassion of God given in forgiveness. The character of God through His compassion and offering of forgiveness. So let's close with prayer, and we'll move into that next week. And we'll then move on to the fact that the second part of what we'll do next week is the fact that God can be trusted even in the dark times of life. So be with us as we continue on through Psalms. Father, thank you for being God. And forgive us our sins. We've all sinned either in things that we've done that we shouldn't have done, or not doing the things that you've wanted us to do. And we need your forgiveness and your guidance daily to be faithful. Help us to have that desire to be faithful to you, because you are worthy. You, as we've just seen in the Psalms, are the King high and lifted up. You are the victor. And the only way into your presence is through your forgiveness of our sins and your faithfulness to us. We don't deserve it. But Lord, thank you for your mercy and your grace. For we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you for being here, and I pray you'll have a good week. Don't forget, Wednesday night we'll be having our regular monthly business meeting. This particular business meeting will be, on the financial side of it, will be the closing of the books of 2021. And we'll share that along with a report from the Committee on Committees. And hope you'll be here for Wednesday night at 6:45 for a business meeting. And then, of course, next Sunday, hope you'll join us too. Thank you. And if you want to fix something for